Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guests are Brian Perry and Luke Grimm of These 16 Things. Welcome to the show, guys. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
Dude, hello from across, what do they say? From across the pond.
That's right. That's right. You guys have basically created this thing called 16 Things. And you gave me a bit of a sort of blurb sort of prior to us filming. And as I understand, it's kind of more about like you built a bunch of like principles, values, etc., that people could potentially live by. And the idea is you want to educate younger generations on these things. And tell us more about this. Like how are you trying to help people with this?
I could start. So the idea came from I listened to another podcast, a whole other podcast that was talking about things to teach your kids that schools aren't going to. And as soon as I heard that, I told my wife, I said, we have to do something around this because I have 7 kids. I didn't at that time, but now I currently have 7 kids. Luke has even more. Luke has 8 kids. So we're out here crushing it on making more babies. And excuse me, we've been friends here for a couple of years, and I've seen that Luke also wants to teach his kids these life skills, and we do too. So as a very quick story or scenario, I can leave on a Friday night. In fact, we did last night. We went out last night. My wife and I left, had to run around, run some errands, and we can leave, and my 14-year-old can take care of the house. She can get the kids dinner if that's what's needed. She can get them in bed if that's what's needed. We weren't gone long last night, but she can do some things to help take care of the family, all the other kids, except for we took the baby. So when I heard this podcast, I thought, again, I want to do something around this. I already teach my kids a lot of these things. Of course, the list is pretty extensive. So it was a good reminder on some of the other things I want to try to teach kids. And stirred it around for a while, and finally, eventually started working on the website, coming up with our process of doing everything. Brought Luke in here. He changed a few things, added some great things that we needed to add to that list. And then we just took off from there, both of us running with this. And the goal is just to teach kids life skills, to make sure they're prepared to stand on their own, whether that's in faith or finances or health. When they leave the house, when they're ready to leave the house, have them ready to live on their own.
What do you think of the... Yeah, go on, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm retired military. I spent 20 years active duty Army, which makes the not having a gun conversation kind of funny, actually. And so I served around a lot of young people that joined the military because they didn't have, not everybody, but I don't know, probably 40% probably didn't have an option. They didn't know what else to go do. They finished school. They never applied to college. They if they did, they got turned down. They had a GED. They never finished with the diploma. They were just lost and looking for direction. There was a lot of young people serving like that. And near the end of my 20 years, I started to think back, where did that happen? At what point did this 20-year-old used to be a 15-year-old? And was there parental guidance? I don't know. Was the kid a rebel? I don't know. Was the kid just trying to find himself? I don't know. But I found a lot of these young people were joining looking for some guidance, looking for some direction. So was I. When I joined, I was 17 years old. And so now that I'm a high school teacher, I teach 11th and 12th graders. I teach government and economics. And I run the alternative education program for students that are not going to graduate because they don't have enough classes passed. And a lot of these students are lost. And when I talk to the parents, a lot of parents have thrown their hands up. They don't know what to do with their kid. They feel like their kid is too far gone down this path, too far gone down this path. Their kid is too heavily involved with this or with this. And Christian, I don't want to go too controversial, but it's usually culture and some, like a tentacle or a spider web that's pulled them in different directions. And the parents would like to bring them back to how they believe, would like to bring them back into their values, but they don't know how. At some point, the parent and the kid have disconnected. So the parents, a lot of them are just waiting till the kid is 18 so they can leave high school and figure it out. And so what Brian and I are trying to do, these 16 things, they're overarching, they're broad topics, but We try to push out a couple lessons a week to say, look, parents, if you're interested in this topic, delete it if you're not. But if you're interested in this topic, read it, sit down for 15 minutes, talk with your kid about this thing. Then on Thursday, we'll send out another one directly related to that. Say, let's take it a step further. And what we would love is for parents to be intentional with their kids. If you want to talk about, for America, if you want to talk about how much you love Donald Trump, go for it. If you want to talk about how much you love Joe Biden, go for it. That is not our direction. We have no place in a household when it comes to those conversations. But we do think if you can be intentional with your kid will appreciate that. Your kid will remember that. And when your kid is out of high school, I think you're going to have a good relationship with that kid because you were intentional with them and show them that you love them. So I know that's a lot to add on to what Brian said, but we want to be intentional, Christian. That's where we're going.
Well, let's expand upon that. What does it mean to be intentional with your kids?
It's just taking the time to lead them as men. And Luke and I are Christians here. And this is something I've been rolling around in my head is, what does it mean to lead my family? What are things I need to do in order to do that? So let's just take one topic of health. Am I leading my family if my family just eats junk food all the time? Am I leading them the right way? I guess I could be leading them in the wrong way, but am I leading them the right way if we just sit around and, we're having pizza every night or microwavable dinners and we're not eating healthy? And by the time my kids are 30, 40, 50, they're going to be sitting in the hospital all the time or going to the doctor every week to get different treatments. So, in my mind, I think everybody would, excuse me, I think everybody would agree that no, I'm not leading them the right way. And that can go in every single topic that we can talk about. So for me, it's being intentional about teaching my kids, again, staying on this one, health. Being intentional about saying, okay, this is healthy food for you. This is really bad food for you. It's okay to sometimes eat that really bad food, but let's focus on eating healthy food. And but just taking that time to actually talk to them. And again, that could be on any number of topics. I just use health as an example. But again, one more time, taking that time to intentionally talk to your kids about these topics.
I remember a couple times I was verbally destroyed in my past career, right? By Army people that outranked me and they just want to just light me up. And I remember because those were one-on-one conversations. I also remember the one-on-one conversations where I was praised, I was uplifted for doing something very well. Those are the times I generally remember. And both of them were intentional one-on-one conversations. Now, everyone's got a boss that goes to work, unless you're an entrepreneur. Brian actually owns his own painting business. I don't, right? I work for a school system. I would rather that I know my principal hates me or loves me, either one of those. I would prefer either one of those than my principal is indifferent. That I go to work, my principal never talks to me, doesn't even acknowledge me. So I want to think about those households. We're talking about now parents and kids. I think a kid wants to know where their parent stands. I think a kid wants an intentional conversation with that parent to say, hey, I matter. I matter so much. My dad is willing to sit me down. My mom thinks I matter so much. She's going to take me out on a date, I don't know, to the mall, to the bookstore for ice cream. And at that location, we're going to spend 15 to 20 minutes talking about whatever the thing is. But kids matter. And I think sometimes parents, we don't know how to engage in that.
I remember when I first got into like my very, very first paid job when I was 18, and I was just like so uncomfortable and tripping over myself at like any single moment, like everything I did was wrong. It took many years. I think it took most of my 20s to kind of realize like that's not the case. That's like an incorrect way to think, right? And I'll extrapolate upon this in a sec, but like basically just this idea that like it's just you're almost paralyzed by fear, essentially. And that's why you need positive reinforcement to come in, be it from a boss, from a parent. And I remember like in that first job, I remember the very first time a manager just turned around to me and been like, hey, well done, man. You worked really hard. Like, well done. And like the way that made me feel because I was just so not used to hearing that. Like, I heard it like from my parents, but like in a work setting as well is particularly important. And I think the problem with the workplace a lot of the time is that like there's this expectation. It's like, well, if you don't hear anything, that means you're probably doing a good job. Whereas if you're doing a bad job, they'll tell you. And that's, I think, a tendency with human beings is we often focus on the negatives. You'll always hear the negatives, but you might not always hear the positives. And if you take like just another final example, take this podcast that I do, what we tend to focus on is key as well, like what we're drawn to. So I have received a lot of positive comments about this podcast, and I'm very grateful for all of them. But guess which comments I focus on the most? There might be 20 comments that are like, this is great, Christian, well done, great episode. And I look at all those and I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And then there'll be that one comment that's like, this is trash, this is terrible, stop doing this show, you're useless. And that'll be the one that I think about for the next month.
So Christian, you know why I like this? The last 45 seconds, you just gave me an idea about what I want to write about in 2 weeks. Literally, that's the thing. Everyone listen to this, pause and consider if you got kids. What if you could get your kid ready to leave the house when they're 18 and they're ready to enter the workforce and deal with what you just said? So we have teachers that when we get evaluations on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 is great, 1 is horrible. You can get tons of 3s and a couple 4s and maybe a 2. And that is what the teachers focus on. They get in their feelings, they get emotional, they become train wrecks, they think everyone hates them. It's like, stop. You got 49 fantastic remarks. You got 1 that's just a little below average. And a lot of adults don't know how to focus on and still work within that. And we're wired to do that, I think. But what if we could sit down with our kids and prepare them for that? That is what we're trying to do.
I think there's another element I want to add to this as well, is that it's important to understand this from a young age and be taught this so that you can avoid manipulation. Because often negative criticism in, say, the workplace can be used. And I get really angry looking back now because I'm fully aware of this now. But when I was that age, I didn't realize what they were doing. They were intentionally saying certain things that they knew would deliberately, I don't know, bother me, cause me to be upset, and then would then mean that I'd work harder to counteract that. And then that's what they wanted. But they weren't treating me like a person. They were just treating me like something they could like push, I don't know, just push around essentially. And it's that's the thing. You have to be taught those kind of, I suppose, self-respect. I don't, and I know this. I know as a teacher you might disagree with me here, but I got to say from my experience at school and a lot of people I know in the UK, they don't really tend to teach you those life qualities. You know, yes, they teach you how to read, write, and stuff like that, but they don't really teach you like things like, you know, self-respect and, you know, like stuff that's going to prepare you for actually dealing with life. You know, I think the only thing that I really learned that was actually useful in life was critical thinking. And even that, I understand, is not like a commonly taught thing across the UK.
I agree. No, I agree. And Brian was going to chime in, but first, to your point of teachers not really teaching this stuff, I agree completely.
Depends which school. I will say it does largely depend on that. But
I don't know. I've been in a lot, and you might have some teachers in some schools that do it, but by and large, teachers were licensed. So here we go. I'm licensed to teach government. That's what I'm going to teach. Is it my job to teach you about all these other things? And if I do start to teach these other things, if I got 30 kids, maybe 20 kids are like, yeah, I need this. And the parents are like, yeah, but what about those 10 that the parents disagree? So, but that's kind of to Brian's point about starting this in general, is it even the role of schools to teach this? Because if they did start teaching some of this stuff, there's no way you're going to speak to every family's values. There's no way.
That's a solid point, actually.
It's tough, right?
No, I agree. I mean, because that was going to be my follow-up point was, like, whose responsibility is it? Is it the family or is it the school? I'd argue probably the family, but then where does that leave, you know, people from broken homes, people whose families, you know, they haven't got it together, or maybe these are people that shouldn't have ever become parents. And it's like, where are those kids left in that scenario? They need someone. And I feel like, bringing it back to you guys, this is what something like this can really help like kids like that maybe don't have those people, those positive role models to draw from. Because I know that like as a young man growing up, like there were certain people I drew inspiration from here and there, but like for a long time there in my 20s, like I was just clueless. I was just like even at like 25, 26, clueless like boy. And then some like really hard stuff happened and I got through the other end and I was like, oh, okay. Turns out I can deal with this stuff then. But the point is, it had to be learnt the hard way. And I don't necessarily think that everyone has to learn the hard way, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Brian.
No, yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people are in your situation where they get out of, let's say, college. Here in the U.S., go to college, or Luke goes to the military. And let's say Luke had done his 4 years in college, did 4 years, get out, and have no idea how to live in life. I wasn't really, maybe a few things about cooking, let's say. I was taught to cook a few things, very little. And when I go out and get my first apartment right after college, living there, working 2 hours away from my family, and that's it's a big learning curve to get all that stuff right then. I have my own income. How do I start managing my money? That's huge.
Oh my God.
Huge skill to learn to try to manage the money. And it's all happening when, again, the first time I'm out of the house. There's nobody around to really help, unless I'm calling my parents asking for help or something, all sorts of things. But I can't just drive over there 10 minutes and figure something out. So that's another point of this is for the families that are together, parents, again, be intentional about sitting your kids down to talk about these things. If you're finding this as a young adult, our lessons are typically written to a parent of teens. But I know for a fact we have a lot of teenagers on our email list as well, who their parents said just go straight to them. And even though it's written to the parents, the teens can get a lot from it. And that goes for people in their 20s as well. And we get things from these. So when we write these lessons, it's typically something that's hitting us right then. And we're not at all saying, hey, listen, my kids are just perfect. So why don't you guys listen to me? And I'm going to tell you how to do life, how to raise kids. Far from it. There are times my kids are, well, nobody's perfect. One of our topics is how to deal with people. And that's a constant struggle every single day. For me, how to deal with anyone, with any relationship, my friends, my wife, my kids. And nobody is going to have that down perfect every time. And I make mistakes constantly, but that doesn't mean I'm not trying to get better at that topic.
No, you're right. I mean, I think and from what you're saying, it kind of implies the fact that, yeah, that journey is never over. You know, you can get into
Right.
like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and you'll still always be learning. And that's an important life lesson to learn in of itself. But in addition, like one thing I read a while ago is apparently with parents teaching their kids tend to like mimic behavior, right? So the lesson is more likely to be learned from following your example as opposed to you telling and doing. So for example, we spoke a bit earlier about like eating junk food and the problem with that was like, okay, let's say we have a family where we're sitting at the dinner table and we're surrounded, you know, we know that the cupboard has snacks and treats. We know that freezer is full of like pizza or whatever. And that's what has been set as the norm. That's what's been normalized. Then healthy options are not going to be the norm, or they're going to be less favorable because that's what we've established in that household. But of course, if you lead by example of like, lovely fresh fruits and vegetables, you know, and like occasionally like, okay, every once in a while we have a treat, but like this is what's good for you. This is what's the standard. This is what's normal. That's key. What they see and what they experience becomes the norm. And then when it comes to, I just wanted to add one final point to that. Another layer is that like, if you're trying to teach a concept like discipline, for example, I don't think that there's any one conversation where you can sort of just go, this is what discipline is, but you can demonstrate it through your behavior. So for example, let's say you're a father and you have a son and you want to teach him about the concept of discipline. You could do it through, for example, training together for say 3 to 4 weeks, or going fishing together for say 3 to 4 weeks, and you set like a routine and you stick to that routine. And then when your child is asking you, well, why do we do that? Why do we have to keep getting up at that time? Why do we have to do it like this, that, and the other? That's when you can begin to kind of explain, well, we need to do this because we need consistency. And this consistency is part of the concept of discipline. And the reason you need discipline is obviously that this is like a way to live your life to get like better results. And also it's just generally going to be better for you overall. And again, I'm finding myself, it's difficult to explain because I think with me in training over the past year, I've found that going to the gym has kind of taught me more life lessons than I probably have learned in anything else, in all honesty.
Mm-hmm. You know what I like about your word? Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I was going to say I guess taking it one step back was your kids are watching. So whether you believe it or not, your kids are learning more by example than probably anything else. So if you are horrible in, of our 16 things, if you're horrible in 15 of those, your kids are seeing that. Right. They are. It's just a fact. And it's not the saying of do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't work. You have to live by example for your kids. But I was going to get into the fitness. Luke can tell you about it more. But Luke, how many races did you do last year?
23.
23 races. And he'll tell you about it. Spartan races. Got to get out there, run on an obstacle course. And so there's a lot of running, a lot of doing obstacles. And I know his family was also involved. And ours was to an extent. But Luke got his kids out there. And you could talk about some of the lessons you may have learned from doing those, or your kids doing those lessons or doing those races.
Yeah, Christian, I love your word discipline there. I think a lot of parents hear the word discipline and they see it as a verb instead of a noun. You discipline your kid. It's something you do to your kid.
Right.
And that happens, and that backs off as your kids get older and older and older. It should. One of the last things you want is your kid to be 18, leaving the house, and the way that they remember you is as a disciplinarian. That kid is probably not going to seek your advice when they're 21. They're probably not going to look for your input when they're dating. They're probably not going to come to you for stuff because they just remember you as a hard case, a disciplinarian. And again, this is coming from a retired Army guy. But discipline as a noun, I like your example of getting up with your son 3 or 4 weeks in a row and training. It's doing the thing, even though when you don't want to do the thing, because you need to do the thing. And usually there's no one else around watching.
Right.
And that develops true character. So I really like that. So I'm going to use that as something with these 16 things that parents disqualify themselves on. You mentioned a cupboard full of snacks. You mentioned a freezer full of ice cream and pizza. And if that's your house, I need to come live at your house. That actually sounds pretty delicious.
No.
But
it's all protein, buddy.
Yeah. So imagine as
carbs.
A parent. Okay, so that's probably a better place, actually. So as a parent, let me talk to the overweight parents. Oh, that's judgmental. Just pause and listen. An overweight parent, and you receive an email from us on a Monday and Thursday, and we decide to write about a fitness lifestyle, not about soccer or cross country, or it's a fitness lifestyle. It could be so many different things, and fitness and eating. And you read this as a parent, and you say, well, I'm overweight. I am disqualified. I can't talk to my kids about this. There's no way. They will never take me seriously. So I'm just going to skip this entire week's lesson, wash it away, pretend it never happened. Money. I heard money come out. We're talking about finances. Let me talk to the parents that are broke. They're in debt. They owe college debt on their house, on their car, but mainly it's credit card debt. And they're like, we are so poor, or we make so many bad decisions. I am disqualified. I can't talk to my kids about this lesson on financial literacy. I can't talk to my kids about saving. There's no way. They're going to look at me as a hypocrite. Okay, let me talk to these kind of parents. Listen, in your kids' eyes, you are the most qualified person for every single topic. You are disqualifying yourself. I know because I've done it. I've told myself I can't do this thing because other people didn't disqualify me. I did. Well, I couldn't go to college. I'm too stupid. You would never let someone talk to someone else like that. But we do it to ourselves all the time. I can't because I can't. I'm dumb. I'm fat. None of these things are true. We tell ourselves nasty things we would never tell other people. So instead of disqualifying ourselves, Christian, I like your perspective of doing it with. So let's use the fitness one as an example. If we were to write a lesson about fitness and food, can you imagine how your kid would receive this? Hey, son, sit at the table. Let's go through this email. It's a 5-minute read. Let's read it together. Okay. Son, I got to say, I got some changes to make and I'm willing to make them with you. So let's talk. Boom. I don't care where it goes from there. For the rest of your life, that rest of that kid's life, they're going to remember my dad, who's probably not fit and is kind of overweight, said he's going to do it with me. That, my friends, that's powerful. That inspires me to watch families go through that. So this is not, Christian, this is not to judge a parent that's disqualified. It's the opposite. You can do this with your kid. So Christian, I appreciate you giving me so much time on that. It's just parents disqualified themselves, but yeah, go through it with them.
You've touched on something very close to my heart. When you spoke about this concept of disqualifying yourself, that brings up a lot of memories, thoughts, feelings for myself and what I've learned over the last couple of years. So I'll take you back. Somewhere in COVID, just, I came back from Europe, let myself go a little bit, wasn't training anymore, I made excuses, etc. Right? I knew I'd eventually get back on it. I knew that I had that kind of mental strength and stuff, right? But, time went on and on and on and on. And, people said some nasty things, sort of backhanded compliments, that kind of stuff. And somewhere last year, around the time of my birthday, I was like, right, now's the time. And a year later, I'm in great shape. But I remember how I used to look at myself in the mirror prior to the training, and like how I would kind of just in general feel about myself. And to your point about this idea of disqualifying oneself, that is exactly how I thought about myself. Disregarded, like, oh, look at look how terrible I look. Look at how ugly I am. Look, this is disgusting. And I'd feel bad. And like little things, my shoulders would be hunched. Now I walk down the street with my back straight. I'm proud. Look, anyone who says that training and taking care of yourself is not a little bit about vanity is lying. There is a little bit of an element to it. But to be honest, it's like 10% of the equation, because the other 90% is about learning to love yourself and appreciate who you are, and realize that when you find yourself in a situation where you are disqualifying yourself, as the example you gave, oh, well, that's not me, that doesn't apply. Well, it does, because it's a lifestyle choice and everything is circumstance. I knew that I would lose that weight and I would get into a position where I liked how I look again. And you know what? I've got into the best shape of my life. And there's been other tests along the way. Like, for example, most recently, I quit drinking for about 6 months. And there was reasons for that. I don't really want to go into here, but I wondered about it when I first started. Like, can I do this? Is this something I can do? And I did it. And then month by month, day by day, gets easier and easier and easier. And you're like, wow. And like, you also notice like, wow, I feel like so good about myself right now. I feel in control. I feel like, and then I guess my point with all of this is that like, wherever you're at in like your life right now, however you might feel about yourself, realize that it's all about circumstance, and circumstances can change. Things sometimes take longer to change. Sometimes they're more of a quick change, but they always can and will change. It fundamentally comes down to you not disqualifying yourself.
It also comes down to, well, I agree 100% with what you're saying, but it also comes down to perspective as well. And for 7 kids, when I tell people I have 7 kids, most of the answers are, wow, I can't believe you do that. How can you have that many kids? I have 2 kids. I'm busy all the time. I'm stressed out. And again, so perspective. So one thing I learned several years ago was that, let's say I have to take my kids to to soccer practice. I'm running around doing different things, whatever it is. So we'll say soccer practice. Well, I got to take my kids to soccer practice. No, I get to take my kids to soccer practice. I live in an area, which most people in our country and yours as well, and for all your European fans, followers, sorry, I'm saying soccer practice. I should be saying football.
Football.
We're
How dare you.
footballers here, right? So when we take them to football practice, or I'm not saying I have to, or I'm saying I get to, or my house is dirty sometimes, and I can look at that and be like, oh my gosh, why is my house always dirty? Or I can look at it and say, my house is dirty because I have a full house of kids. If it's not just our kids. One of Luke's kids was over for a couple of days this week. Of course, she doesn't make anything dirty. She usually cleans more than she makes dirty. But other kids over, and I can say, my house always dirty. I'm tired of having all these kids over, all the extra kids over. I just want my kids. I want them to keep it clean. No, I can say that. Or I can say, our kids are just having a blast. They're not really purposely making it dirty. If it gets dirty for a couple of days, they do go back and we clean the whole thing. But it gets dirty because I have a house full of kids that I love, and I'm surrounded by family, and that makes it worth it. So, and that can be for anything. I have to go to work. No, you get to go to work today. You get to you get to go in, make some money, and support your family. So it's all about perspective as well.
I gotta ask, yeah, great points, by the way. Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. I know my audience will crucify me if I don't say this. So 8 kids, 7 kids, how do you guys like even begin to manage that as far as like, let's look at it from trying to give equal time for each kid, equal focus for each kid. Like, how do you even approach something like that?
Yeah, I
Go
can.
ahead.
Yeah, so we actually have a system in our house.
Interesting.
Like on these 16 things, it's intentional. Our houses have to be intentional. If not, some kid's gonna fall through the crack, and we don't want that to be their story.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, so in our house, we got a list of chores and 5 sections, and the oldest 5 they rotate every week. So because they're doing these hard work during the week, and the older 3 are responsible for the younger 3, and they rotate. So at the end of the week, they get their allowance money, but we take them out to a certain store. They love doing crafts. So take them out and they get to spend that money on crafts, or if we got to order something, but they love that. But in our budget, my wife and I, we have $25 set aside per kid to take them on an individual date. At some point during the month, either my wife or we will take each kid out. So that's 7, because the youngest one, he's not even 2. So it doesn't mean a lot to him yet. But we have 7 daughters, then this young. And so I will date my daughters. I'll take them out to a bookstore and ice cream. One of them just a craft store. One of them just wants to go to the park. They all crave different things, but dating our kids is important because it reminds them, my father loves me so much, or my mother, that they will intentionally spend time with me. And in a large family, I want them to remember that when they're out of the house. I don't want kid number 5 to say, oh, I was in the middle and I was forgotten about. What a horrible story. That's like trauma. I'm not trying to create that. So Brian can speak different to his family, but for us, we have intentionally budgeted money and perspective. We don't have to take them out. I like how Brian said perspective. We get to take them out for a couple hours, and a couple hours, one time a month, is nothing. We just got to put ourselves aside and do something with the kid.
Christian, think about, which I'm sure you understand this, but think about a fast food restaurant. And I assume they're the same over there, but over here, it tends to be mostly teenagers. So you go into this McDonald's. I don't go to that, but some people would go to McDonald's, and they go in and they can order their meal, and most of the time it's going to be right. But how do a bunch of teenagers serve that many people in that amount of time? It's because there's a system. There is a system of why they do exactly what they do, and typically they're set up on one task at a time to take care of that, whether that's putting the burgers together, whatever it is. So what Luke's talking about is having the system. I can't just wake up every day and think, okay, today I'm going to, without any other planning or thought beforehand, okay, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to make sure my wife knows that I love her. I'm going to make sure my kids know that I love them. I'm going to make sure my kids are organized. The house is clean. They get all their stuff done. And it's a good day. I can't do that without any planning or organizing beforehand. And I get it. Sometimes we wake up on a Saturday and think, okay, we have no plans today. It's a free for all. But in general, I think you guys understand what I mean. So having some sort of order of how to do things and setting that up beforehand. So Luke's family has their system. It works awesome. We're probably a little less organized here, but we still have some organization. My wife they have their chores that they're supposed to do. And then every Friday, my wife will take one of the kids out to lunch. That's their mommy date for staying on top of their chores. And that's our system for that particular thing. We have other systems for other things, but that's theirs. And other than that, for me, let's say, because I don't have that set time every week to take a kid out, I just try to get some quality time in. So sometimes that means that the two oldest stay up until 10 or 11 with us watching TV, because we've recognized that they need that time to just be with the kids, well, with the two and then us. So they need some time away from the 5 youngest kids running around causing chaos, and it just needs to be parents and oldest kids. So whatever that system is for you guys, or for anybody listening to this, is, again, have some sort of system, have some sort of organization on the process of how you do things.
How do holidays work for you guys? That must be like really regimented, because you're away from like home space, like controlled space, like, so things can go wrong, things can kind of I suppose mess with the plans. How do you guys approach that?
We're pretty laid back, and let's take nap times, for example. Some families, which I get, I've seen some studies that make it look really, really good to have exact, set nap times and everything, but we just wing it, we'll say. So if we go to my parents for Christmas Day, and we're over there and it's nap time for the couple youngest, sometimes they get a nap, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they sleep in somebody's arms. Sometimes they get to go lay on somebody's bed where we're at and take a quick nap. That's fine. Same with staying out late. It doesn't happen very often, but there's times we're out past bedtime. And sometimes that means that the kids are sleeping on the couch while I'm playing cards. We play a lot of cards with my parents. And sometimes that does go till after bedtime. And if the kids fall asleep on their couch and we have to carry them to the van, drive home, carry them back out, that's fine with us. So I'm going to say it could be chaotic, but we try to have organized chaos, if you can understand what that means. But again, I could look back and think, I don't even want to go to my parents' house for Christmas. I don't want to do all this. It's going to be a horrible day. Kids are going to be crying. They're going to be eating too much junk food. So tempers are going to flare. Or I can look at that and say, we get to spend Christmas with our family. Yeah, sure, the kids are going to cry some. Sure, they're going to get grumpy, but it's going to be okay. We're going to have a fun day.
I think most grandparents want to see their grandkids.
I should hope so.
Yeah, I believe that. But yeah, so check it out. I think this is going to be video too, right? Not just audio. I think. Yeah. So if people see all 3 fingers up, so you got the grandkid, you got us, the adult, the mom and dad, then you got the grandparent. And I think that most of the times the grandparent and the adult, those relationships can be, I don't want to say busted and fractured, but they're just blah. They're plain. There's no real built up relationship. And so the adult's like, well, we're not going to take the kids. There are too many of them anyways. But the grandparents want to see their grandkids. They really do. Like, I think grandparents will move closer to where their own kids are just so they can see their grandparents. Mine did. And when we retired military, we got my wife, her family in one area, mine in the other, probably about 16-hour difference. We intentionally came to where we are now. We didn't know anybody. We'd never lived in the state in our lives, but we just knew it was in between grandparents. And we're kind of intentional about making those trips. And to Brian's point, it's a little chaotic, but that's part of their adventure. That's part of their story. When they're out of the house and they're getting married, that'll be part of their story as a kid. We all got in the van. It was hot in the van. The AC was horrible. It was so cramped, but man, we love taking those trips. That's how it ends. We love taking those trips.
something I picked up on as both of you were talking, which I find really interesting, is that a lot of the activities that you do are like completely nothing to do with like modern technology, right? So yeah, you might be watching TV here and there, right? But you'll be doing things like playing cards together, playing board games together, doing things together. Now, I've got no qualms with that. I think that's amazing. That's exactly like if I ever have kids, what I'll be trying to do, right? But we live in a different time, and you can't really get away from technology. You can restrict access to it. You can try to not let it take over. Um, Easier said than done. Even myself in my own life, I limit it as much as I can, but I still need it to do a lot of different things. Like even just doing work, you just have to be like near computers. So sometimes yeah, you just want to get away from it. Anyway, I wanted to kind of speak to that a little bit. Like, do you guys kind of purposefully keep that restricted in your homes or like where you go, or is it something that you just kind of explain to your family like, okay, listen, like we just have to limit this, like we just have to have like a healthy relationship with it? Talk us a little bit about that.
Brian, didn't you write a lesson on this a few months back, and you talked about that movie on Netflix,
I did. Shoot, give me a second. What was
Social
that?
Dilemma? Social
The
Dilemma.
social dilemma. Yes, and if I remember right, in that it talked about studies that have been done about, I guess if you want to say the mental health of people or how unhappy people are now compared to before social media, and especially teenagers. And then if you want to narrow it down, it's even, I think, more so teenage girls posting everything on TikTok or Instagram and needing to get those likes. So that is something. But as far as what we do, I'm going to say, Christian, we do all of what you talk about, and it's always it's never set. I guess it's always chaotic. I get, if you want to say that, which I know I just talked about being organized, but and I say always, there are times it just is not managed very well. So, and I'll tell you how. Typically, my boys love their Nintendo Switch. They love, if we let them, they would play video games all day long, but we don't. Typically, they're going to get it's no more than an hour a day on that, and most time during the week they don't get any of that time. So weekends they'll get an hour a day usually, but there are times we say just it doesn't matter. You know what? Today's your day. If you want to play for 4 hours, do that. That's probably about the limit. We don't go any past that. But our kids, my 14-year-old daughter has a phone. She has zero social media. She's rarely on her phone unless she's listening to a podcast or something, listen to some music. But again, no social media, so she's not making these stupid TikTok dances. My 13-year-old son has what we call the kids' phone, and what that is when the kids go stay the night somewhere, whoever's going to stay the night gets to take that phone, so that way they can have a way to be able to reach us. And there's been times he's abused that. We find him upstairs texting a bunch, but he also has no social media, and they get some access to YouTube with us, with them understanding what they're allowed to watch and us monitoring that a little bit. But that's about it. So he typically now just leaves that phone downstairs. It's in our bedroom. It's laying on the counter in the kitchen, and we can look at it anytime we want to make sure there's nothing going on that shouldn't be. So to make sure he's not looking up things that a teenage boy shouldn't be looking up, or that he's just not sitting there staring at the phone constantly. And we've all seen it. Luke and I talk about it all the time. You're out at a restaurant and you look over, and the table next to us, there's 2 adults, 3 kids, and they're all sitting there on the front. Exactly what Luke's doing right now. And the worst I saw a couple months ago was a dad with 3 kids. The dad rarely looked up from his phone.
Oh.
2 of the kids did the exact same thing, while the youngest kid, who clearly just didn't have that phone, is sitting there quietly, not talking, just staring straight ahead. So now it's even worse. She doesn't have her phone to keep her occupied. She has to sit there being quiet with not one person in her family talking. And this lasted 15, 20 minutes while we're sitting there, as our whole family's just sitting there talking away, having fun, enjoying the meal. And So I know I'm rambling on and on about
No,
this,
no,
but
no. I think it's
just
important.
it is very important because people just don't understand what that's doing to their family, and then they wonder why their kids don't talk to them. As parents here, they wonder why their kids aren't talking to them when they don't make that attempt to talk to them, and they let them have their phone whenever they want.
And I think as well, it's like a healthy mixture of both. I mean, I'm
It
sure
is.
we can all relate to this. Like when we were growing up, you're a kid, you're in the room full of adults. It's probably boring. Not always. Maybe there's some kids that are a little bit more switched on and maybe even engaging in the conversation. But generally speaking, from a kid's perspective around adults, it's not always interesting. Sometimes it can be rather dull. However, that can obviously be mitigated by interaction. Things like doing activities together helps, and often you feel more included, you feel more part of it. That I think is the key. Really, is lesser that it's a boring situation. It's more that like you just don't feel included. Like if you're just sitting there and all the adults are talking, doing what they're doing, and you're just sitting there, and it's like you're not allowed to do what you want to do, can feel sort of unfair, and you could maybe even start to sort of resent your parents for that. And if we take your example of like parents going out, like if they say to their kids, all right, you can't be on your phones, but then I can,
Yep.
that's very unfair. But I think as well, like a lot of what you guys have kind of mentioned there is like laying ground rules and kind of goes back to what we were saying before about normalized behavior. So like when I go out with my friends, I don't touch my phone. Like I don't even think about the phone. I'm out with that person. But I see exactly what you see. I walk past like restaurant windows and you see like couple after couple after couple in like booths and they're just on their phone. And you're like, why? What's the point? Why not just stay at home? Like if you're just going to be on your phone, like I don't get that. And maybe they don't see the problem, but over time you will. And as you mentioned there before, 10, 15 years from now, when your kids are grown up and you're not hearing from them, that's on you. That's your fault. It all comes back to the old saying, isn't it? What you put in is what you get out of that
Yep.
relationship.
Garbage in, garbage out. Christian, I like something you said earlier that I don't have kids, but if I did, okay, so that's the question, right? What do we want? Whether you have no kids, you got a 3-year-old, or you got teenagers. So Brian and I, our oldest are teenagers now, ish, 14, 13. We each have a set of 14, 13-year-old. What do we want our kid to be like when they're 20? When it comes to this very specific topic. Okay, well, forget us. And that's the thing, right? We're like, oh, I'm always on my phone, so I don't care. Yes, you do care. You absolutely care. You could be a raging alcoholic, but you care when your 9-year-old goes into the fridge and opens up a beer. You don't care because of what the law says. You care because you don't want your kid to do these things.
Mhm.
You could be a raging alcoholic. You don't want your kids to become alcoholics. And so even if you're addicted to your phone, we're coming back to disqualifying yourself. You are still qualified to talk about this. Can you imagine? Imagine sitting down at the table with your kid, right? Let's say this is a lesson. Like, hey, kiddo, let's both take our phones face down, put them at the edge of the table. And let's see how many times we both look at our phones during this conversation and just tell them, look, I'm not here to put restrictions. That's not what this is about. I'm not here to limit screen time. That's not what this conversation is about. What I'm telling you is I love you so much that I want you to have authentic relationships. And that comes from what you said, Christian. You're out with your friends. Those are authentic relationships. And dude, we're in for some heartache. When our current crop of teenagers come out of high school, how are they going to date? What do they know about this? What do they know about sitting down in a room, making eye contact, reading body language, understanding how to date? I think we're in for a mess. Now, so if we could just regain balance, would be okay. But I think our balance is shifted to where a lot of teenagers, and again, I work with them, a lot of teenagers, electronics is all that they know. And they can be successful in business and with a job, but I'm talking about authentic relationships face to face. Go ahead.
I will say this: I meet a lot of people with lots of different ages, like wherever I go and online, etc. And a lot of it comes down to choice. Like the younger generations are also aware of this problem, and I think the ones that are a bit more switched on about it being a problem are a lot less likely to just constantly be on their phone. I know of people that have like just completely deleted social media entirely. I envy that. I wish I could do that. or just kind of like purposefully taken themselves out of that situation and put themselves into, you know, the healthiest scenarios, which is real life. Like social media, the internet, it's not real. Like it is and it isn't. Like the way people interact with each other is different from real life. Like you said, it's texting someone is never the same as being in the room with someone.
Yep.
Yeah, like I always tell people to call me because I can't stand like how things get lost in text and lost in translation, or just how frustrating it is, a million miles a minute. It's not the same level of interaction. Yes, the internet has brought us together and does amazing things like allowing us to be able to have this conversation from around the world. Fantastic. But at the same time, we still got it goes back to that old word, doesn't it? Discipline. We have to have discipline over this. And I think people are beginning to realize, I mean, it's like 20 or so years, maybe I think you could probably say around 20 years of like this form of the internet, right? Because obviously the internet's existed for a long time, but like as it exists right now with social media and everything, we're moving into like a new phase, I think, where people are kind of coming out of it and realizing like, okay, there's a lot of benefits to this, but there's a lot of negatives to this as well. And it is having a negative impact on relationships. And to speak to things like, say, going on things like TikTok and stuff, I recently took a real big step back from that. And there were various reasons for that. But I must say, I'm so much happier since not being on that, because the short form content and the scrolling effect and everything is like something you get sucked into.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of studies on this as far as like studying the brain and how it affects the brain and stuff. And the consensus seems to be that it kind of just destroys your ability to appreciate long form content or to have, you know, attention, like long form attention. So there's a lot of kids now that are experiencing things like ADHD, which that's genetics, but like things like TikTok are not going to help with that. It's going to make it worse, if anything.
So, yeah. So with a lot of the kids in my government classes I teach that struggle with writing an essay. Mm-hmm. Now, I know everyone is not a good writer. I don't expect everyone to be a good writer, but every 2 weeks they have to turn in a 3-page paper. That is their only grade. I don't give you these multiple choice quizzes. It's just three pages. You have 2 weeks to do it on tons of topics. And they struggle to turn in anything that's coherent. Not everybody, but a lot of them do. And I would give some critique. And I'm like, look, I understand your thoughts. We're good on the thoughts, but we need to learn how to convey your thoughts. And then I would start to ask them, what do you read? And majority of these students, what they read is, you know, their Twitter, their Facebook, stuff that's on a phone. And so, okay, when is, tell me the last book you finished. You can't. I'm not mad about that, but there's a theme there that when somebody, because you mentioned long form content, that's what made me think about this. Students, talking about teenagers that can open up a book, I don't know, a 300-page book. It's gone through an editing process, multiple edits, gone through the publishing. It's formatted right, the grammar's right, the spelling's right. And it takes time to understand what someone's trying to say. It develops the mind different than what Twitter will give you. And a lot of teens become used to LOL, WTF, OMG, the emojis, conveying how they feel through. I picture someone that gives me the smiling or laughing emoji, but they're sitting on their couch like this. But they're pretending to laugh. And when I was a drill sergeant at basic training, I'll try to make this a very short story. As a drill sergeant, at boot camp, when soldiers leave their stuff out, we get to go through and destroy it. Not mail, but we get to destroy everything. But someone left a notepad out. They were writing home. And this 23-year-old, I think he was 23, was writing home to his mother. And it's open. It's not mail yet. And so as I read this gentleman is writing to his mother. And in his handwritten letter, 17 different times he put WTF, LOL, OMG, and he wrote the little smiley faces with the tongue hanging out. This is a grown man trying to be in the United States Army, writing to his own mother. It was full of grammar, full of spelling errors, everything. And this was the most socially awkward person in our group. And I don't know what it all means. I don't know, but I will forever remember a grown person writing a handwritten letter with LOL written in, with OMG written in. I'm thinking, how did we get here? That's not the norm. That's an outlier, but I always remember it, Christian. I wish we could rebalance. I do.
You know, I think as well, a big element to it is maybe it is what your parents teach you as far as like, you know, things we covered earlier, discipline, where to spend your time, etc. But I think a lot of it is also maybe personality too. I mean, I remember when I was a teen, it was during the era of like video games on things like Xbox 360 and stuff online, and that was becoming more and more prevalent. It was like, if you like, the golden era of that, the first proper wave of it, I would say. And I remember back then, like, you know, you'd have access, you could sit and play games all day if you wanted to. And believe me, plenty of teens did. But like, I remember I'd play video games for like 2 hours or something, maximum four. But like, I remember thinking, like, this is too much. I just want to go outside and play, or I want to go hang out with my friends, go to the skate park, go to London, whatever. I didn't want to sit around playing video games all day because I just felt like it was tiresome. It was I don't know, like you're just sitting in one position doing one thing, and like I had great times. Don't get me wrong, but like at the same time, there was that kind of discipline even at that age, you know. And I think back now, it's crazy. I used to get myself up at like 7 or 8 a.m. on a weekend, a teenager, yeah, waking up at that time to go to the skate park in London because there was a particularly really cool one that I used to go to. And I'm thinking like, okay, so that level of discipline was there, but maybe that was like a personality thing. Maybe that was, it could have been influenced by a lot of things, like what I'd seen at home, what I'd seen from various role models in my life. But point is, like, I think you have to look at maybe the personality of your kids and kind of try to adhere your parental style to that. I mean, you guys have a lot of kids. Sounds like you obviously all of those kids are going to be different, like, do you know what I mean? And you've got to adjust it accordingly. You can't apply the same approach to all of them. And often with schools, that's where the problem lies, because it's like, okay, well, this might work for these kids, but that's not going to work for these kids. But you're still trying to give like a blanket kind of one size fits all kind of approach, which is just not always going to work.
So something Brian's done very well when he started this, so I definitely got to give Brian some kudos, is when we write these lessons, he makes sure that we recognize what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Different kids in all these houses, everywhere. And so let's use social media as an example. Let's say we write a lesson about social media with your kids. Who are we to pretend to know what's best for your kids? Even if we knew you were one kid very well, we don't know them like the parent does. And that's just one kid. Well, we have hundreds of families out here. So it would be very, I don't know what the right word is, very uppity, very high and mighty, very egotistical. I don't know what the right word is to pretend to know these things. Mm-hmm. So instead of coming at it from that approach, we'll go back to the question where you said, Christian, I don't have kids, but if I did. Okay. So parents, if you could take a step back and say, what do you want your kids' values to be when they leave the house? We mentioned faith. So let's come to faith. Without being controversial, whatever somebody's faith is, whatever it happens to be, when your kid leaves the house, then they go to university, they go to work. Brian mentioned McDonald's. They go to McDonald's or they go to college, and a coworker or a friend says, "Christian, why are you a picket? You know, why are you a Christian? Why are you a Catholic? Why are you Mormon? Why are you Buddhist? Why are you Muslim?" And the last thing you want your kid to say is, I don't know, my parents just made me go. Because if we truly believe in our own faith, we would like our kids to have that faith. We would. We'd like to impart our own values. Maybe not push, but we'd like them to have that. And so what we're trying to tell parents is, look, imagine that perfect scenario. Your kid is 20 years old. How do we get from there back to where we are? How do we get that? We got to sit down and be intentional. So if your family has screen time all day, every day, we're not pretending you should limit that. We're just saying, have a conversation about what healthy looks like for you all. And I think parents want to do that, but and Brian's used this example a lot, that parents, sometimes we just get tired. We come home from work and we're tired, man. We just want to kick our feet up and watch something dumb on Netflix all night. But then it's 9:00 at night. Our kids are gone. We don't see them, and another day is gone. That we were not intentional. So 15 minutes once a week, that's nothing. We can do that at the table. That's all we are, man. We're trying to give people tools and encouragement and empower you so you can spend 15 minutes at the table with your kid on this topic. Because I know you want good for your kid. I know that you do. Let's just make the time for it.
And I think you could apply that to all relationships in life as well. Like when you really think about it, it's just taking the time to sit down and be like, "Hey, listen, let's have a chat about this. Let's do this. Let's, you know what I mean? And it's amazing how far that can go as well. Like when I think about the concept of empathy as an example, I used to have a very bad understanding of what that meant, because I was like very pragmatic minded, still am, but I didn't understand like how powerful it could be to just sit down and be like, "Hey, I'm here," or you know, "Talk to me, tell me what you need," or "Do you want me to just sit and listen?" Cool, all right, and you just listen and you don't say anything, you know. Or my favorite is to go up to someone and say like, "What is it you need now? Advice or an ear?"
Ah, that's good.
You know.
I'm using that one.
But it's like, I think a lot of the time in those specific situations, the person might feel who needs the empathy probably feels powerless. And so if you come in there just like, "Oh, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this," it kind of undermines that. Whereas if you come in with love and respect and you're just like, "Hey, I'm here, I understand you," and you just offer them that level of respect and understanding, and of course your sympathies, that's going to go a lot further. And when that person feels better about things, they're going to remember that. And going back to your point before, your kids, they might not always remember what you said in a given context, but they'll remember those times that you sat down and spent with them, and they'll remember the fact that like, damn, like I got all this many siblings and dad was still able to sit and spend time with me.
That's it. Man, you should run a podcast or something, man. You got lots of stuff to say. I don't know. Brian's looking to chime in, man. Just tell me to shut up, Brian. But your video game conversation. I think back how you get up in the morning, go to the skate park, and versus the video games. This is if somebody has balance,
Right.
just the way that you speak. I mean, you are totally in for having conversations, relationships, and I think that you are a prime example of what it means to, I don't know your age, but to leave the house and just have a healthy life. You can interact, you can function. Dude, you're highly successful with this stuff. And we just want to empower parents. Well, I know, I got you, but what you're not is you're not not inverted. You don't talk introverted. You're not conceited. You're not egotistical. You're none of these things. You are ready to talk to people and turn the conversations to them. You're ready to inquire with people and get their thoughts on stuff. That is just a small example. It's a very small example of we have to be intentional with our kids to show them how to do that when they're older. Brian mentioned finances. That's a hard skill, managing finances. If we don't teach them how to do that now, your kid will be broke as a 20-year-old.
Mm.
If we don't, Brian mentioned dealing with others, interacting with others. If we don't teach them how to do this now, your kid will get fired from a job and for talking back to a boss, and they don't understand what respect looks like. If we don't teach the things now, we've already gone through a lot of these issues. Let's just teach our kids so they don't have to go through some of these. We want them to learn, but I don't want my kids to get fired from jobs. They don't want them to learn that one. That just some examples, man.
This is what I meant earlier when I said learning the hard way versus learning like in general. Because obviously the hard way is, you don't show that level of respect, or someone's going to make you understand what respect means. Or, you say the wrong thing to the boss, you get emotional. I use this as an example. I've understood that in professional situations, be it work, be it dealing with a landlord, whatever, always maintain the same level of professionalism and don't allow yourself to be emotional, because if you do, you've lost your bargaining power, you've lost maybe respect, you've lost your position in that, and people won't take you seriously anymore. Now, That's not to say that people shouldn't show emotions. You can get a little bit heated with a boss if they're treating you badly, if they're not showing you the respect you deserve. However, there is always a way to show emotion, but also be in control. You can't just like let it out and just let your boss have it. Because I can tell you, I have my temper under check. I always have, but once or twice in my life, I've let it go. I remember there was a situation a couple of years ago where I did, and I was really ashamed about it. And I realized, and I was honest with myself, and I looked at it like, this was ego. This is what this was. I allowed this to kind of just go to a crazy level, and then looking back on it, like I had to be the one to like save that scenario and get it back to like we're talking again, because
Yeah.
and that's another element I'll just add to it as well. Nothing will be achieved if you're shouting at each other. I can tell you that much. Like you got to be sitting down, showing respect, having a conversation. That's when you solve these issues.
Yep.
Right.
And
What do we miss? Yeah.
well, I was just going to add in that when we're talking about what we're doing, so lessons to your kids, it's okay to say, hey, I haven't always gotten this right. I have not always managed my money. I have lost my temper, or managed my money well. I've lost my temper. I have made friends mad at me. It's okay to apologize to our kids and say, listen, I may have been tired last night trying to put 7 kids to bed. Not that our older ones need help going to bed, but trying to put the younger 4 to bed. I may have lost my temper, and I apologize for that. But sometimes that, when you mentioned chaos earlier, when we were talking, that can be chaos is bedtime sometimes. But it's okay to say to the kids, or if it's a relationship with your friends, whatever, listen, I'm not perfect. I never will be, but let's go through this together. So I'm going to bring it back to that finances, because that's one topic we've been talking about some. Kids, I made these mistakes when I was your age, or when I just got out on my own. I did this. How about we set up a system for you to go through this so you don't make those same mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, and there probably can be other mistakes, and that's fine. Everybody has to go through that process of learning, again, whatever topic that is. But I've gone through these mistakes. This is what I would do. This is why I would do this. That's a big thing as well. Not saying just do this. Say why we're doing certain things. And again, tell your kids you make mistakes. So if I'm going to go have a surgery, if I need to go to the doctor, have a surgery done, I don't want the doctor to be brand new to this and say, listen, there's going to be mistakes. I'm going to make some mistakes. Maybe you won't make it back from the surgery. I would like him to have somebody else say, listen, these are mistakes that I made, or these are mistakes I've heard about. Don't make these mistakes. So that is okay to have that talk. It's 2 different things, but it's okay to have that talk with the kids to hopefully lead them in the right direction. And again, we're not perfect on this. Neither one of us are. As I said, we make mistakes all the time. So we're not saying when we put out a lesson you got to do it this way, or you're just an idiot parent. Not at all. Half the times we write a lesson, it's because we made that mistake. So, hey, let's learn from what we did. I know I've put out a lesson saying, listen, guys, I just did this, and I realized that it was dumb. So here's my lesson on don't do this. Don't do what I did.
If I ever find myself in that scenario, I'm going to make sure that if the doctor says that, I'm be like, can you get a second opinion? I'm not letting you touch me, Jesus.
Mistakes will be made. Hold still.
Oh my God. Something you touched on there, which I want to expand upon a little bit more, is this concept of like, I will get it wrong. I will make mistakes. And like, often I feel like that's when kids really listen as well, is when their parents start telling them about times when like, well, I did this, because it's more relatable, isn't it? Like when you look at your parents as a young kid, it's like they almost seem like a different species in a sense. It's hard to imagine like, oh, at one point they were my age and they, maybe they do understand what I'm going through, or because it just feels so far apart. You feel so far apart sometimes, and you don't understand why adults say and do the things that they do. Maybe it seems unfair, maybe it seems unjust, etc. Right? Even just like how teenagers are, like chemically, like they're more impulsive, they're more emotional, because of chemistry. Like you're still growing and growing until I believe as far as like your mid-20s even. But crucially, and this is the thing I wanted to raise, there's this point where you suddenly realize, and it varies for everyone, but you suddenly realize your parents do not know everything. And your parents are people. And maybe your parents are even like winging it and they'd have no idea. Now, for instance, we spoke about structures and stuff. I'm willing to bet that you guys didn't sit down with your wives and go, all right, well, we're going to plan it out. This is how it's going to be. Right. It probably was like oh, okay. we'll figure it out as we go along. Maybe we'll take advice from parents, read books, etc. You take information, but you still figure it out as you go along, and you make mistakes as you go along, but that's how you function, right? But I think that's an important concept to understand. It's okay to make mistakes, and that's how we grow, and that's how we learn. And that your parents made mistakes too, and that's just what life is. Because I think as soon as it becomes like admonishing and punishment for making mistakes, that's a crucial element. Like I had to de-learn that it's okay to make mistakes. Because I remember like school really just made me feel bad about a lot of things where this is concerned. Like I bring this up, I've brought this up in my live streams before, but this idea of like at school, they would say things to me like, don't ask questions. You're asking too many questions. Why don't you understand?
School.
Yeah.
This is at school.
At school. I kid you not. So I stopped asking questions. And then other times it was like, you're talking too much, which I find this hilarious. You're talking too much. You need to learn to be quiet. And now everything I do in my life involves a lot of talking and a lot of asking questions. And so what does that teach you? Well, it teaches you that not all the information that you receive is correct. It teaches you that certain people you listen to, certain people not. But also, I think it teaches you that any adult that's being fair and reasonable with you and showing you respect and showing you like it's okay to make mistakes, etc., they're going to be the ones that you listen to and mimic. And the ones that are harsher and almost unrelenting, you're more likely to rebel to that. You're more likely to act back to that. I'm willing to wager that you guys have less problems when it comes to disciplining because there's that level of respect that you show your children. You talk to them, you let them make them understand like, okay, well, this is why we're doing this. And this is why this is happening.
In the United States Army, there's actually a textbook definition of the word leadership. So if you go in front of a board or a panel and you're getting asked questions, you want promotion, whatever, there's actually a question one of the people will ask you. Sergeant Reeve, what is the Army definition of leadership? And the textbook answer is, Sergeant Major, leadership is the process of influencing others to accomplish the mission by providing purpose, direction, motivation. Here's what I've always found lacking, PDM, purpose, direction, motivation. The word that's missing is the why, the reason. We can tell you what's going to happen. That's the purpose. We can tell you how to do it, and I can motivate you, inspire you. But what's missing in that is here's the reason for it. And I get it. If there's war and there's combat, you need someone to go do something. You don't want that person to stop and ask why. You just have to do things. So you train them for that. But a 13-year-old wants to know why. And you asking questions in school, there's a reason you're asking a question because you don't know something. And so if you can have that respect, like, I actually in this house, we want you to know why we do things. And this answer doesn't fly very well because I said so. No. Because I'm dad. It's just maybe with a 5-year-old, but you can't keep doing that. And kids want to know why things happen. And the good news is, if kids know why things happen, they learn how things operate. Yeah. They're actually better prepared for decision making. They're better prepared in crazy circumstances at work or at college or when they have kids. They know why things happen. I had one other interesting thing. You're talking about listening to people for parental advice. I have found that finances and parenting, people want to get better in both, but they don't want to openly disclose how they do their own finances or how they parent. And if you were to get in someone's business and ask them this very simple question, don't answer it, of course, Christian, but Christian, how much money do you make? People don't want to answer that. Hey, buddy, what's your salary? How much you make? They might tell you per hour, but they don't want to disclose that. You cannot have an honest conversation about finances, which means no one can ever tell you if what you're doing can be improved upon. I can't say, look, I think you're making mistakes here. Have you thought about maybe a small investment like this? You can do, dude, you can pay off your debt. People don't want to open up. And the other one's parenting. Nobody typically wants someone to come into their house and say, look, what you did, that discipline was wrong. Here's the better way. People want to get better, but they don't want honesty with it. And so we're kind of hoping, Brian and I, that when we do these lessons, that we're not coming down as high and mighty. We're not coming down telling people what to do. We're just presenting what we think is a good way. And when Brian writes his lessons, I sit down with my kids and we go over Brian's lessons. The kids come, oh, Dad, when are we going to go over Brian's lesson? Right now. Let's stop what we're doing. It's worth it to us because nobody comes and tells me. They're like, oh, Luke has 8 kids. Who's going to tell him how to parent better? Tons of people could. I just need somebody to. So I look forward to the Monday and Thursday newsletter that Brian puts it out here in his weeks. I do. I look forward to them.
So we do the same thing. We'll sit down and go through the lessons. Whether I write it or Luke writes it, we sit down and go through the lessons with the kids.
So you're putting out a weekly newsletter, or bi-weekly, sorry. And are you also doing like lessons, lectures? Like talk us a little bit about the structure of this, how you're sort of giving this information out and helping younger kids.
I can do that. The idea of this is, again, we send out a lesson Monday and Thursday mornings. Of course, that's our time here. And they're both going to be on the same topic, but 2 separate lessons. So Monday we'll go into whatever it is. Let's say I'm going to use a cooking one because I used that a couple weeks ago. So Monday we talked about the importance of eating a healthy diet and a healthier snack or part of a meal is what we went over. And then I think I put in all the ingredients to get, and then Thursday's lesson was actually cooking that thing. So we talked about the health side of it. We talked about the process of actually making that dish. And so that'd be the 2 lessons going together. But the goal is we try to make it. I get that maybe cooking a meal is going to take longer, but the goal is that parents take their kids, like we said, intentionally take your kids and sit down at maybe the dinner table and have this talk about whatever that lesson is about that day or that week. So, but with that, we want, we've talked about doing this intentionally, and we feel like the best time to do that is at, like I said, the dinner table. Our kids, we all come together. We're actually eating dinner in our dining room. Ours is actually a big room, so kitchen table. We sit down, we eat, and that's when we have everybody's ears. That's when we have everybody's attention. So that's when my family does it. Families can do it whenever they want, differently if they have another time that works out better for them. But that's how we've designed it. Sit down at the dinner table as we're eating dinner. I typically eat faster than my kids anyway. They're talking, having fun, playing, and right when I'm done eating or when my wife's done eating, unfortunately, sometimes it is on the phone, but we'll pull out our phone, we'll read through this, say, hey, let's talk through this. And obviously we read through it, we put it down, we have an actual discussion with the kids. And that takes me back to having adult conversations with your kids. The kids appreciate that. They really do. We've had some very awkward conversations, some very high level conversations with our kids. And sometimes it comes down to finances. My kids know what I make. They know what we spend on the mortgage. They know a lot about our finances. And I think that's important for the kids to understand because they may be looking at 2 different careers. And one career makes $50,000 a year. One makes $100,000 a year. And they're going to say, I could go either way, but I think I'm going to go this career. And say, well, that's fine. Understand that it's going to be, you may struggle to pay your bills, let's say, at that. Not telling you to turn away from that. Just understand that there are 2 sides to this, and you do have that decision to make. So, and it's not just careers or income. It's all of, just high level decisions that kids are happy, I think, when they're pulled into some of those decision making.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I will say, it's a rocky road with that one, because if you do find yourself maybe in a friction issue, or you're at odds with your kid, they might use that information against you. So it's a tricky one. However, what you said there is crucial. It really is, and like we touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the conversation. But this idea of like being able to make better informed decisions later on. Like think about like how much better it will be, let's say in the preparation for the college process and moving forward, planning things out ahead of time. If you know how to manage your money and the value of money and what it means, and like, okay, entry level, this is what this kind of job will look like out of college, or if I don't go to college, this is what these careers can get me, and this is what I'll be able to do with this, etc. And this is what this looks like monthly in terms of like getting an apartment, my food bills, my taxes, insurance, etc., etc., etc. It's like fully understanding the value of money and what that equates to, and what certain careers are going to give you as a result. Like I feel like it's almost like essential knowledge, and it kind of blows my mind that it's not taught in the UK or in the States. I know there might be some examples here and there, but I can state it as fact that it's not something that's taught in schools, and that blows my mind because it's like so important. You know, even just forgetting like money for a second, just the value of things, the value of your time, you know, and like what that equates to. Like right now, we're in a situation where like I turned freelance, right? So with actors are freelance, we're freelancers, and I started freelancing in marketing maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and I had to like completely relearn how things work. So like I was so used to like the 40-hour week, or you know, rota based work via customer service or whatever. So I'd done those different styles. I'd never thought about the concept of like, I could maybe do like 3-4 hours work, and this could equate to half a month's pay if you know, if I've negotiated a good enough contract or whatever, and that can keep me going. And then what does it become about? It becomes about managing your money, managing ahead. But yeah, who teaches you that? I've had to figure that out myself.
So I have good news. I have good
Go for
news.
it.
One of our 16 things, word for word, Christian, is called, hold on, I want to make sure I don't mess it up, as you said, value. It is called the value of time.
Yeah.
That is one of our 16 things. You mentioned video games. I came up playing video games too. I graduated high school in 1997. So when I was in South Korea, my first time there as a 19-year-old, the PlayStation 1 was out. Went there a second time in Korea, the PlayStation 2. So yeah, I remember. And I think about right now, today on a Saturday, how easy it is to waste an entire Saturday. Well, somebody else out there is getting a certificate. Somebody else out there is studying for an exam. Somebody else out there spent time with their children. Somebody else out there put in 4 hours of work to help feed their family. All of those things are the same time, same 4 hours, but goodness, what we get from is vastly different. And that's an example. How do we teach that to our kids? So, Chris, man, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk about this. And if there was any takeaway, if there was any huge takeaway for someone listening as a parent, it is you are uniquely qualified to talk to your children. You are uniquely called to lead your children, to lead them to be adults, and you are called to do that. You are qualified. And that other thing is your kids want to hear it. So if you can find 15 minutes to sit down and have those conversations, pick a topic. We just give you examples. That's all they are. But take 15 minutes. I believe this because Brian's kids are and mine are. Our kids are hungry for our time. They're hungry for those adult conversations. I believe that.
Speaking about the value of time, I want to respect your time because we're close to 2 hours. I don't know how long we got, but like it's been a while, and there's some key questions I want to ask you before we sort of finally wind things down. So, final quick fire questions for you, totally unrelated to what we've been speaking about today. Last month was actually Men's Mental Health Awareness Month in the United States. In England, it tends to be in November. I actually found this out recently. That's do it, and this represents another issue. The fact that like this isn't like immediately known. So we do the Movember thing. People grow silly mustaches, but it's not specifically just for men's mental health. It's for like a range of different charities, and it's an awesome charity. That's in November. In the States, it's June. Obviously, it's Pride Month as well, but it's Men's Mental Health Month. I don't know why it couldn't just be a different month, and then you've got like that focus there, because obviously that Pride Month is an important holiday as well, and that's, but it's something very different. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I feel like men's mental health gets like overshadowed. If you want to kind of make it serious for a second, look, the statistics don't lie. There are a lot of suicides in the States, in the UK, around the world. And I think this is an issue that's not often spoken about enough. And I've spoken on it on my channel a few times. I try to speak about it when and where I can. Um, I wanted to get your kind of advice to young men struggling with their mental health and who might be in a difficult way. Like, what advice could you give to them?
I can take this to start, and then Luke, you can chime in if you want to add more to it. But in my opinion, and I know Luke feels the same on this, but men need community. Everybody does need community, but men need community. And for us, it's especially hard because let's say we're going through something mentally, some sort of mental health issue. It's really easy for us to say, well, I'm not going to hang out with my friends this weekend, and kind of take a step back and say, again, I'm not going to hang out with my friends. I'm not going to, if you go to some sort of religious things, church, I'm not going to go to church this week. I'm going to just take my time by myself and become more and more isolated. And I think that's easy as men to do, especially. So we're busy, going to work, raising the kids. Obviously, if we're married, we have the spouse to help with that as well. But like I said, it's easy to just become more and more isolated, and men need community. So that's my thing. Join some sort of group, get out with other men. Sometimes we just need to go sit and have dinner. Next Wednesday night, Luke and I will be we're in a men's group as well through our church, and we're going to be meeting with whoever shows up. We'll say 5, 6 other guys and just hanging out. Sometimes we just hang out and talk because that's our time to get away and have our group. So that's my 2 cents is, guys, get a community. Whether you find it online or not, it needs to eventually move to at least some of it in person. But that's my biggest advice for that topic, I guess. So.
Thank you. Luke, could you add to that as well? Anything?
I would have said the same thing. It's easy to get together with a bunch of guys, drink some beers, and you go home and you could say, "Oh, I met with the guys." Yeah, but all you did was hang out. Hanging out and having fellowship are 2 different things. Hanging out is superficial. Having fellowship is. This is tough because this borderline turns into a culture war. So I'll be careful here. Men in the last 10 years in movies and film and pop culture have been demasculated. We've been told that these things are toxic. These things that many men would say that we are inherently structured like this and women are inherently structured like this. Well, look at films. These kind of men are told that we're bad, we're toxic, and it becomes confusing to a lot of men. A lot of men think that if I act a certain way, it is now wrong. Now, whether the 3 of us agree or disagree on that topic, I can tell you that that's how a lot of teen boys feel. When I was getting out of the military, that's how a lot of the men in the military felt. I was like, I don't know. Am I allowed to do this? Well, I don't know. And so let me kind of narrow this in. I think that men should be able to get together with other men and be authentic and real and genuine. Maybe that's my broader point. I don't want to go culture wars. That I think that men should be able to sit down and have real, authentic conversations. And sometimes that means being vulnerable. That's what made me think about it. Being vulnerable is tough for a lot of men. To actually open up and say, "This is my thing." And if we can be vulnerable, the other guys, listen, when we get together for breakfast and lunch in a men's group, we don't laugh at anybody with what the thing is they're going through, and neither will your friends. They actually want to be in a community like that too, but it's tough, man.
Yeah, something interesting that you said there. You said like in the last 10, 15 years, what it means to be a man has been challenged a lot, and in some cases there's been demasculation and stuff like that. And like, I both agree and disagree with this, and I know you're hesitant on this issue, and I think it is a tricky one for us to kind of traverse. But I will say this, like, one thing I learned growing up is that what it means to be a man is something I think that you have to kind of like figure out for yourself, and that there are like lots of different types of men. I don't think that there's any one specific, like, this is it. This is how a man should be. Maybe historically there was, and I feel like, Hollywood and culture has challenged that. And I think to some degree there has been a lot of good work there. There has been some toxic stuff that's been called out, pushed aside, and been like, this is not what it means to be a man. This is a negative trait. However, I do also think that it has put us in a position where it's like, well, what does it mean to be a man? Like, how do I like, what are the values I should have? And it's like, at the end of the day, I think what you said is the key thing we got to focus in on. Is it's okay to be vulnerable and talk about these things and kind of move through them and talk to your buddies about these things. It pains me to say it. I just add one more thing to this. Like, when I want to reach out to people and open up to people, I open up to women. I don't open up to other dudes.
Huh.
And I'm
laughing because I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
I'd like to, and I'm not going to say that there's no other guys I've never like opened up to in that way, but I feel like depending on what your upbringing is and what you're used to, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And I feel like a lot of it is like, when I think about hanging out with other dudes, it tends to be like, oh, we have a laugh. It's the boys. We do this, we do that. Yep. And there's some awesome stuff in that you need. I mean, Brian, you spoke about community. Community is really, really important. I think you need that. But at the same time, I think we do need to be able to like open up to each other every once in a while and be like, hey, you know what? Like, things suck right now. Like, I don't know. This kind of sucks. And just get it out. You know, you don't even necessarily have to like go for it, like talk in depth, but just being able to just say it and know that you're not gonna be laughed at or whatever. Like, that's something I like that has changed, is that you don't get laughed at, you don't get told. And again, there are people that challenge that. I for example, I never, if I'm working in a place and I'm going through a difficult time, I'm going to keep that to myself because I know it will be used against me. And I know there's expectations like, oh, you can't act this way, you can't act this way. And it's like, but if you're going through something, it has nothing to do with being a man or being a woman. It's just, as a human being, if you're going through something, it's very difficult to focus. And you know, that old expression, like, oh, put your problems aside, leave them at the door. It's like, it's easier said than done when it's something really, really heavy that's taken over your life, you know?
And you know, Christian, if you go backwards from, you're at a funeral for a friend of yours that commits suicide.
Yeah.
Go backwards in the timeline. And everyone says, I wish they would have said something. I wish they would have. Okay, well, how about this question? Why didn't they?
Yeah.
So if you were to start going backwards, if they're truly your friend, this is not putting guilt on somebody, but were you part of an environment where people could? Did you foster an environment where somebody would come to you? Were you busy hanging out with the boys, or did you sometimes have honest, deep, vulnerable conversations? You can still have a beer there. No one's saying you can't have a beer, but I'm saying, were you part of the atmosphere where all you're doing is hanging out with the boys, or were you, as men, willing to have tough conversations? Because if you go backwards, I hear that question a lot, man. Why didn't they tell us? Probably for a lot of reasons. Probably because they didn't know who to go to or they didn't feel comfortable going to. So Brian and I, with our men's group, we are intentionally set that atmosphere up, and we ask some tough questions, and we get some good conversations. But it's tough as a lot of men to open. I like how you said that.
No, it's also, I think that's the key, isn't it? I mean, that kind of solves both those things. You provide a community, and you also offer a space where it's like, and I get it. Like, some guys are more open, some guys are less so. Again, different types of men, you know, there's no right or wrong in that. But I will say that for any guys that are listening to this who maybe they feel like they can't talk about these things, like, please do. At the end of the day, you're not alone in this. Like, I'll give you an example. I was at the pub the other day, and me and my friends actually, it was me and my friend, and we'd met some guys, and they were just like playing darts, and it was a lot of fun, right? And I saw a guy on his own. And he was like this big jacked dude, you know, he's wearing sunglasses indoors and he's all serious and everything, right? But I saw right through that. I could see that, like, this guy's got something going on. And I just sat down, and at first I was like, hey dude, you're right? You having a good time? And he's like, yeah, I'm good. You know, here and there. But, you know, I can tell something's off. Yeah, he puts on a big persona and like the strong exterior, but I see through it. And I said, hey, listen, if you want to join us, come join us, man. And he was like, yeah, I might do that. He doesn't join us. 20, 30 minutes later, I sit down next to him and I'm like, hey, man, you sure you don't want to join us? You want to hang out? And, we just talked for a little bit. And I guess my point with this is I made sure that like whatever his night turns out like and whatever he chooses to do, he knows that he's included in that. And at any point he can just get up and come over and hang out and it's fine.
Good
And
for you, man.
that's the key is like just looking out for each other. Just being like, hey, listen, you don't have to do this alone.
Yep. People have value and they have worth. That's right.
Okay. A couple of quick fire questions for you. My final questions. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Wow.
That's a good on the spot question, right?
That is a good on the spot question. Boy, there's been so much good advice. I'm trying to narrow it down. Luke, do you have something, Luke? Because I don't have something off the top of my head.
I think I do. It came from teaching, but I've used it forever. A principal was observing my class one day when I first started teaching, and during my evaluation on it, she said, wait. So spell the word wait, W-A-I-T. And she came across as, why am I talking? And her comment was, you as a teacher did the majority of the talking. And I'm just used to teaching in the Army, instructing, but I had 6th graders. I was a brand new teacher right out of the military. And why am I talking? And you could actually funnel that back to the men's mental health is me just talking to a guy. That's not going to solve something. The person going through the issue, they kind of need to be heard. So I have really told myself, wait, whether it's leading a Bible study or I'm in the small group with Brian, I'm doing anything. I'm talking to my wife. I don't know if that's the best advice, but that's really good advice that I've taken.
Similar question, but different approach. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Biggest life lesson. I'm not going to say this is the biggest life lesson, but a big life lesson is just understanding that we are all flawed. So I'll just use my relationship with my wife, for example. Not that this happened, but if we do get an argument or something, and I don't agree with what she's doing, and this could be friends, this could be my kids, anyone, understanding that there is another side to the coin, their side of an argument, a disagreement, whatever that is, and understanding that sometimes we make mistakes. I'm going to make them. She's going to make them. So we're flawed, and a little bit of grace can go a long way.
Agree more.
Grace, I like that.
It's a beautiful word as well. Like I know I know it can have religious connotations, but I know it's also just like it's like hand in hand with respect, isn't it? Doing things with like a level of care, I suppose.
I mean, if I do something bad, something wrong at home or something wrong at work with my kids, I'm like, yo, I'm so sorry. Can y'all just forgive me? Give me a little bit of grace. We crave it. We want it. But I can be pretty slow to give it. So I like that, Brian.
Final question for you guys. Do you have any upcoming projects or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Upcoming projects for the website, we will be adding, hopefully soon, it's been a very long process, we're going to be adding a lot more content to help parents teach kids life skills. So I've been putting in a lot of time on some information that I'm putting together. So that'll be rolling out soon. If anybody wants any information, just follow us on the website. Go to these16things.com, sign up for the email list. All of that will eventually come out in that process, I guess. So if you're receiving the lessons every week, you're going to hear about what we're working on next.
Excellent. Well, listen, gents, it's been an absolute pleasure having you both on. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I know our listeners will. So I just want to say a massive thank you for your time and for all your lessons and everything in between, and just for the work that you're doing. I think that it's really positive stuff, and that, if anything else, is what the whole point of my show is about, is trying to like show you that, you know, maybe despite what's going on in the world, there are good people, there are good things going on, there is reasons to keep hope and to keep just keep trying. It'll be okay.
Yep.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
We
Chris.
appreciate the time.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
to
man.
all the listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for listening. See you in the next one.